Welcome back in, everybody. It's another edition of the First and Orange podcast. Parker Gabriel here, Ryan McFadden there, Denver Broncos beat reporters at the Denver Post. Ryan, it was like pretty legitimately a quiet weekend after the Thursday night game last week. Did you like go on a lavish vacation or something?
I just watched college football and slept.
There you go. Yeah,
Got much needed sleep.
yeah. The bad losses for the two most prominent teams on the Front Range were over by the time Saturday morning even started. Right, Broncos on Thursday night, and then CU giving away that big lead against Stanford like Friday night, wee hours of Saturday morning. So obviously, yeah, Broncos. It's been a few days now. Lost 19-8 at Kansas City Thursday night. At Arrowhead. They'll see him again in not too long here, coming up 12 days from today. We're recording this Tuesday late in the day. Yeah, I guess first of all, Ryan, let's revisit that one just for what it's worth. What did you first of all, first time to Arrowhead for you? What'd you make of the scene? And then overall, I mean, just sort of a strange game for the Broncos in that it was sort of opposite day where the offense played terribly and the defense actually put a pretty solid effort forth.
Yeah, first time at Arrowhead. I love the vibe. I love the environment. I kind of wish the game matched the energy that was at the stadium. I think this is probably like my second time seeing, no, third time being around Chiefs fans, and I always loved their energy. But being at their home stadium was pretty dope. But like shifting to the game, you hit it right. You hit the point. It's like it was like opposite day for the Broncos on where the defense actually held their own and actually kept them in the game. The offense didn't, and where you saw like the offense was like dysfunctional. Credit like
Yeah.
Chiefs defense has been really good this year, and they were really good on Thursday night. But like the passing game struggle, and it just I think from top to bottom, you're talking from protection and from the offensive line, Russell Wilson's performance, two interceptions. So like even though he's had a good year so far, like he's not out, like he doesn't get excuse for that type of performance. So you go for him, pass protection. I think play calling as well. There's a lot of questionable calls, a lot of questionable things Sean Payton did on his side, and he even admitted it himself. So overall, it's like when you're playing, like you got to take advantage of something like that. And we went in there assuming like the Broncos were going to win the game.
Yep.
We didn't think it was going to be that close. Um, but if your defense is playing that good and knowing that they haven't done that in the past, like you have to take advantage of that. And I feel like they didn't. And and it sucks because we've seen this team on a daily basis, from practice, games, preseason. We've seen Russell Wilson perform, and like the time that this he gets the national spotlight
Yeah.
where he can say, "Hey, I am not the guy from last year." He literally looked like the guy from last year. So I feel like that was like the biggest, like I sit in the press, but I'm like, man, I'm like, this is like where we've always talked about. We like me and you've said he looked better this. He
Yep.
looks a lot better. Even numbers wise, he looks a lot better. It's like, all right, we said it, we've seen it. Now it's like prime time. He can finally show the whole world that, yeah, I'm better than last year. And boom, two interceptions, 95 yards passing, and just an ugly um, evening for the offense overall.
Yeah, and it's crazy, right? I mean, he played. I mean, first of all, that's what it looked like most of last year. So congratulations on not having been here to watch 17 games of that, 15 with him starting. The other thing is like by the numbers, if you take quarterback rating as one measure, right? Like it was worse than any game he played last year. And if you go by adjusted net yards per passing attempt, I think there's only three games in his entire career, a decade with Seattle and then obviously last year and so far this year with the Broncos, where it was lower on that metric than it was Thursday night at Kansas City. It was just bad. It was bad from the start. I mean, at one point, his first 8 pass attempts, I think he had five completions for 13 yards, 2 sacks, and an interception. It just was like they had nothing going in the passing game from the start. And the thing I think if you're, fans won't take it was just one game because of what they watched last year and because the issues looked sort of similar to last year. And I think what's going to be interesting over the next 2 weeks or so before the let's say before the bye week, Green Bay and then Kansas City again, is they played four bad defenses the first 4 weeks, and he played pretty darn well. And then the last 2 weeks, they've played defenses that the Jets statistically right now look middle of the pack, but we know they're talented. They've played well, recently. And then Kansas City's been one of the best defenses in the NFL so far this year. And the struggle has been more pronounced in those 2 weeks. So the question is like, can Russell Wilson sort of rise to the level of competition here as the season goes along? Or is this sort of like, well, teams got to look at sort of how they wanted to operate on film over, against some pretty poor defenses over the first few weeks of the season. They figured them out. And now, now you're sort of back to having just overall bad quarterback play. So there's a lot on the line, I think, going forward for Russell Wilson, just in terms of, confidence level from this coaching staff, confidence level from the organization, and whether he can, be the solution for longer than the next few weeks. And certainly for as much good as you could have taken out of the first month of the season, you can really sort of take that much bad out of the last week, especially, and the last couple of weeks more generally.
Yeah, and I think it's been tough because, like you said, the Broncos they played some pretty bad defense at the start, yet they were unsuccessful in terms of winning games. That's why, that's why we kept saying like that stretch to start the season. It'd be nice to see,
Better win.
better win because when you get to this point, you're trying to you don't know what's going to happen. And so to have like a couple wins um, in your pocket, I think that'd be huge, especially from a momentum standpoint, from a confidence standpoint. But yeah, I think we're at the point is where, all right, Russell Wilson has looked good against bad teams. Now, all right, let's see what he does against like pretty solid defenses. And so far, to me, he is not off to the best start when you look at games against New York and Kansas City. So it'll be interesting to see how it moves forward because, like you said, I think a lot is on the line here. If he goes out there and continues to struggle against really good, like solid defenses, Denver is going to have to start looking at, all right, what's the future? What's the future at the quarterback spot for us?
Yeah, well, and that's, I mean, I think the way that Denver's going, obviously at 1-5 now, they've got Green Bay and then Kansas City at home, bye week, and then the trade deadline arrives, and then after the bye, they start at Buffalo on Monday night, and so like I think I was just messing around. The New York Times has a like analytics model about playoff probability and all that, and it will shock you, Ryan, to know that they've got the Broncos at less than 1%. It's not gonna happen. And the thing is, even at this point, even if they won every game aside from Kansas City, Buffalo after the bye week, like they've basically got to win out besides that in order to be in the playoff conversation. And not only is that just not a realistic part of the conversation at this point, reel off 3 wins in a row and then let's talk. But like, not only is that not realistic to really be thinking about at this stage, but the flip side of the equation, which is that you end up with a really bad record and a really high draft pick, sort of it's become more and more a part of the conversation the further we go forward. And so part of what is going to put pressure on Russell Wilson here over the next several weeks is not just, hey, does Denver need to think about what its long-term future looks like at quarterback? It's, hey, Denver might need to think about what its long-term future looks like at quarterback, and they're steaming toward a top, I don't know, 5-3 pick in a draft class that is setting up to be a really quarterback rich draft class. Obviously, you never know, there's no such thing as a sure thing. Caleb Williams is as much of a consensus prospect as there's been in the last few years, but that's the sort of wrinkle on this of like, it's a bad year for it to be a decision point year for any veteran quarterback, and for Russell Wilson especially, because of what the quarterback group looks like. And we can obviously talk about that, talk about the trade deadline, but like just in general, like I think a lot of this is not just, oh, it's been a rough couple weeks, and then a rough year last year for Russell Wilson. Let's bury the guy. No, I mean, you're operating in an environment where if you're the Broncos, you're not planning on having top 5 picks every year going forward. But if you've got one this year, you're going to be awfully tempted to look at this quarterback group and say, like, maybe we can solve a big problem here and set ourselves up for a long run, into the sort of intermediate and further out future.
Yeah, I feel like Denver's in a tough spot where it's a lot of decision making that needs to be made. I know it has to be a lot of conversation between ownership, GM George Payton, and Sean as well, because you are in a situation where there are a handful of quarterbacks in the draft, but so you're looking at it, but at the same time, you've committed to Russell Wilson,
Yeah.
especially financially, $245 million worth of money. So and you got to sit there and look at it. All right, we're 1-5. The schedule doesn't get any easier after this. If we're in a position to draft a quarterback, what do we do? How do we view the future? And you hope that when Sean Payton says they have a vision for the roster next year, I hope that include like they're thinking about that as well. I would assume they are,
Yeah.
because you're in a tough spot. Even if, like, let's say Russell Wilson just balls out, but the team is still average, you still got to sit there and wonder, all right, do we still believe in this guy
Right.
for the next 5 years? And we missed out on potentially drafting two. Not saying Caleb Williams and Drake May is going to be, the next big thing, but if they turn out to be, then you're looking at a few years down the road, like they missed out on a shot to, like, establish a franchise quarterback for the next several years, and he's a lot younger. So it's a lot of decisions. And I feel like this year is really it's been hard because that's where they're at. Um, even if they don't just, even if they go on some certain run like magically like turn around and go on a run, you still have to sit there and think about can we take this team and build it for like to be winning, like winning multiple and excuse me, have winning multiple winning seasons down the road. Like, how do we get to that point?
Yep.
So it's a lot to talk. It's a lot to think about with this team, and it's crazy that they're in this position. But yeah, here here we are.
Here we are. And, it's funny because it's not like, I mean, I think this is one of those years where, like, whoever ends up with the number one pick, like they are either taking a quarterback, and in the rare scenario where maybe that team doesn't need a quarterback, but even like, yeah, I think if Chicago ended up with the number one pick, like they're probably taking Caleb Williams and trying to move Justin Fields. If Arizona ends up with it, they're probably moving Kyler Murray and taking, Caleb Williams. Like, maybe someone will fall in love with Drake May, or even Shedeur Sanders if he goes out or whatever. But like, just to take Caleb Williams as the example here, like, it's not the year where, Olu Fashano or one of the, Joe Alt, an offensive tackle or an edge guy, is going to go number one. Like, it's going to be, and then in the picks after that, teams probably will line up to try to move up to get the next quarterback, and maybe even, 3 in a row or somewhere in there. So like, it's a long way off. But the interesting thing, Ryan, is like, if Denver ends up in that like 5 to 8 range, like, you may be in a situation where then it gets even more difficult, because it's like you're going to mortgage even more draft capital and more of the future, or trade Pat Surtain or something to move up from 5 to 2. But the reality is, like, they could use a left tackle. Like, they haven't drafted a tackle since Garrett Bowles in 2017. They could use another dynamic edge player. So it's not like they could, I think anybody could use Marvin Harrison Jr., the wide receiver from Ohio State. So like, it's not like it's necessarily quarterback or bust in the draft for the Broncos, depending on where they end up. But you sort of start setting the course toward what 2024 is going to look like in the next 2 weeks before the trade deadline, without actually knowing, you know, where you're going to be in the draft, or what sort of opportunity you're going to have in the draft. So you basically just need to know 2 things. Who are the guys that we feel good about dealing now for whatever we can get at the trade deadline? Who do we want to at least keep through the end of the year, because we're thinking maybe they're part of the equation going forward? And then also, like, heart of hearts, what do we think we're doing with Russell Wilson after this season? Like in some order, those are probably the considerations that are happening, even like between now and October 31st.
Yeah, and one thing I feel like every time I check Twitter, I just see a bunch of Broncos fans just photoshopping Caleb Williams in a Broncos uniform. But you did make a good point here. Like outside of the quarterback, if let's say the Broncos are not in a position um, to draft Drake May or Caleb Williams, and those are like to them were their surefire guys. And maybe after that, they don't think the other quarterbacks in the class are the type of guys that they think they can build around moving
Right.
forward. Are the Broncos in a position where they make a trade to get additional draft capital because that's something they lack? So that's something, and also too, like you mentioned, they need offensive tackle.
Yeah.
They need to me some edge rusher. You can make the argument maybe if there's a cornerback to consider. I feel like I to me, I think I think one thing with Denver is to understand that you can put Caleb Williams in a Broncos uniform. That's not going to change. That's not going to turn this team around overnight. There's so many issues that this team has across the board from offense to defense that needs to be addressed. So, and like I said, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Um, I think eh, I think to me, when it comes to like teams are bad and they're in that position to draft in that top five, top two range, like the immediate thing is we got to go quarterback. We got to go quarterback. But if they're not in that position to draft Caleb Williams and or Drake, then you have to look at it like, all right, we still need offensive tackle. Or could we use our pick to acquire more draft capital? So
Yeah.
I feel like the Broncos at the moment, I think they can go a ton of directions. But it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of the season plays out, how Russ plays out, because I think like that's going to ultimately decide, all right, this is the direction we're going to go.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's interesting too. Like I'm totally, I guess I've, too much like draft analytics or whatever. Like there's always something to be said for the whole, and we have like literally months to talk about this, so we don't need to go like too far into it now, but there's always something to be said for the like trade down, especially when you haven't had a lot of draft capital in recent years. They don't have a second round pick currently this coming year in 24. So like, but there's also, you hear like George Payton has talked about this before. You hear evaluators and decision makers talk about there's always a cutoff of how many blue chip players are there in a draft, and that varies draft to draft. Maybe it's 8, maybe it's 12, but like if you trade outside of that, then okay, you might be you're gaining a pick, but is it enough to convince you to move outside the top group? A lot of time for that. More pertinently, we'll see how much draft capital, if any, the Broncos can add, between now and the 31st with the trade deadline. Ryan, we've talked quite a bit about this. We obviously think the Broncos, they say they're not doing business with any of their players, but teams call. Sean Payton said that again on Monday. But like teams are calling because they're bad and they're looking to see how motivated the Broncos are going to be to sell. So let me ask it to you this way, because I think we know, like, obviously Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton are going to get talked about. Justin Simmons is going to get talked about. There's going to be a lot of rumors. But in your mind, is this a sell the farm, all anything not nailed down must go regardless sort of like the price that you're getting for it? Or do you think Denver should take a more measured approach of like, if we get it, this sort of like how they approach this offseason, right? Like they didn't get a deal they really liked for Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton, so they didn't make a move. Like had they got offered a first round pick or something for Jeudy, like we would probably not be having this conversation right now. So they didn't get the price they wanted. Can they hold firm on pricing here through the deadline and say, we'll worry about some of the stuff in the offseason? Or is this you've got a chance to add, some arrows to your quiver, even if they're third day picks for the draft next year? You've got to do it before October 31st, no matter what.
I think the Broncos are at a point where like if you can get the picks, I think you have to move forward. I just for example, like Jerry Jeudy in particular, I think it's hard unless you truly believe Jerry Jeudy can just turn around. It's hard they're not going to get a first round pick off this guy,
No, no, no.
and
Maybe not.
that's
Probably not a second round pick.
and probably not a second. So if you're not going to get that, and you're able to get, let's say, a third round pick off of him, or a third round and maybe another pick, maybe I think you might have to make that move because it's clearly not working right now. It's not, um, and and I don't know. It just I feel like that's the Broncos are at a point where, like, if you can get I don't think they can stand pat right here,
Yeah,
um, because like you said, you're 1-5. Like the chances are making the playoffs are slim to none. So if you have an opportunity to kind of add more draft capital, then I think you have to pull the trigger. I was like, I think some players might be harder than others. Like, I know people talk about Pat Surtain. I don't think Pat Surtain is going anywhere. It's hard. It's hard to find a shutdown quarter like Pat
yeah,
Surtain.
no
They
doubt.
they don't just kind of like Pat Surtain. Guys like Pat Surtain doesn't just walk through your door every single day. So I don't think you don't pull the trigger on him. I think you have to keep him and try to say, hey, let's build defense around you. This is your group. This is your unit. Take control. Take that leadership role, and be the face of our defense moving forward. But outside of that, I think they should be open for business. And I think, to me, they can. I don't think they're at a point where they can just stand pat, and just say, all right, let's hold on, because I think teams are already looking at, like you said, they're looking at Cortland Sutton and they're looking at Jerry Judy. They're watching the same games. They're watching the same film as everyone else. And and to me, so far, none of those guys have shown that they're worth, let's say, a second round pick.
Yeah,
And that so if you don't think you're going to get that from them, and they're probably not, then you're going to have to go, the next best step.
yeah. I think obviously slightly different situations, especially Randy Gregory with the contract. But like when you think about the fact that they've already jettisoned Randy Gregory and Frank Clark, and what they've done in sum total is saved 2 million on their cap, and they've moved up maybe like 20 spots or 25 spots in the draft from early seventh round, sort of like above the comp picks into the sixth round, wherever San Francisco's pick ends up. Like, you're just not, this is not the time of year when you're talking about terrific value typically on the trade market, unless you end up having a guy that multiple teams want. And that's not impossible, right? But like, it does, it's going to be interesting. Like, last year, George Payton's taken, a lot of criticism, and then several of the moves, rightfully so. I don't think anybody can argue with the value he got for Bradley Chubb last year, when he got a first round pick from Miami, for Bradley Chubb. So, but Bradley Chubb's a really good player. I mean, Miami turned around and signed him to a $110 million deal like 3 days later. So you don't have a guy like that on your roster that you're trading, unless you're talking about Surtain, which I completely agree with you, Ryan. Like, trading perennial all pro players is typically not good business, especially guys that are 22 years old. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. And I think, like, I just think fans probably, and maybe some have by now, but like, I think you just temper your expectations in terms of like what the return on some of these deals look like. I mean, largely you're talking about day 3 picks. You're talking about maybe like attaching a pick to a player to move up. Like, there was a ESPN, Bill Barnwell, who's amazing, obviously, at his job, did 15, trades, sort of interesting. And one of them was structured sort of like a couple deals we saw in the offseason, where it was like Jerry Judy and a 4th round pick to get, I think it was Romeo Dobbs from the Packers, and a 2nd round pick. So like, you're using a player and a later pick to end up with something closer to a premium pick. Like, all sorts of things to consider over the next 14 days. George Payton, the Broncos scouting staff, Darren Muji, the assistant GM, obviously Sean Payton. Busy stretch coming up. I thought it was sort of funny that Sean the other day was like, well, you don't need a 4-day summit to figure out what your strategy at the deadline is. It's like, yeah, I mean, not when you're 1-5. And also, like, they're meeting multiple times a week about personnel anyways. So they talk about this stuff a lot, and they obviously are, it's a critical juncture coming up. So it's going to be, yeah, I don't know if it's going to be wild. Maybe it will be underwhelming. Sometimes we make make it out of like, man, they're going to trade 8 players and then like one thing gets done or something. So we'll see how it goes between now and 2 weeks from basically a couple hours ago on that front. And then Ryan, that begs the question, like, is it actually like I I wouldn't be surprised if there's fans out there that are basically like, why would I hope that they beat the Packers? Like, why would I hope now that they win a couple games against bad teams and end up with the 12th pick rather than a top 5 or something like that? But the players and Sean, all they're going to talk about the rest of this week is going to be like, we've got to find a way to go win a game and see if we can get the ball rolling.
Yeah, I think one thing fans forget, this is the football is not the MLB and it's not the NBA. So it's not like you can just for baseball, like if your team's about to rebuild, they're gonna trade away like 5, 6, 7, like a bunch
Yeah.
of guys.
Yeah.
Just to get more prospects, and maybe players with like with low contract numbers in order to prepare for the future. But the NFL is a lot different. A lot of these guys, they want to compete, they want to win, and it's hard to if you're going to keep Justin Simmons on your team and not trade him. It's hard to walk up to Justin Simmons in the locker room and say, or walk up to him in the meeting and say, "Hey, we want Caleb Williams. You could go out there, just don't care." It's hard to say that because of the nature of the sport.
Yeah.
So I know fans probably I think at this point they can care less if the Broncos win or lose on Sunday. But these guys are not going to go out. They're going to give it their all, even though if their hardest doesn't seem like that. But yeah, it's just hard to look at this team and just say, all right, it's over, forget it. It's the NFL. They're going to fight tooth and nail to compete, even if they lose. It's hard to say hey, we're going to get rid of a bunch of guys and just go out there
Yeah.
and do whatever.
No, tanking in the NFL is really, I mean, like, there's really, I don't want to say there's no such thing, but for the most part, it's something that happens in the offseason. Like, you end up putting together a roster that's not good. And the Broncos did not do that. They spent more money than anybody in free agency this offseason. They just have ended up being bad. And so, yeah, I mean, what Kiz wrote a couple weeks ago, tanking is just another word for nothing left to lose. And I think I said, tanking is just another word for not good enough to win. And that's really what it is. Like, we've seen what the secondary looks like without Justin Simmons. Like, it was not good. They get PJ Locke back. Obviously, he didn't play in those games also that Justin Simmons missed. But you're talking about where, like, if you dealt some key guys off of this team, like, Garrett Bowles, they're going to have a decision to make on Garrett Bowles after the season. Like, he's got a $20 million cap hit next year. He's got no more guaranteed money. He's 31. You got all these things that, like, in NFL, NFL lingo, they all add up to like decision time. But if we're being realistic about it, like, they are a better team right now with Garrett Bowles on the field than if Cam Fleming was playing, or if they were playing one of the undrafted rookie guys or whatever. Like, it's not close. So that's sort of the if they sell at the deadline, they trade a bunch of guys. One way to spin it's going to be, man, they're tanking. And the other way to spin it's going to be like, man, they're just stocking up as many draft picks as they can for next spring. Like, it all comes out the same. Like, you're not as good a football team on paper as you were the day before, and you're planning for the future. So all of that is going to be interesting. The Packers they're sort of like, they're not in the same, they're 2-3, and they're coming off a bye week. They got the young quarterback in Jordan Love. Like, do you think the defense, if we're just going to talk about the game for a couple minutes here before we, get out of here, do you think the defense can sort of carry on from where it left off against Patrick Mahomes and company on Thursday night and put up a good performance against Jordan Love and a really pretty young offense with Green Bay?
I think so. I like you hold the Kansas City Chiefs, reigning Super Bowl champions, to one touchdown. You picked off Patrick Mahomes. You could have picked him off twice, but that questionable defensive pass interference on Mathis took away the Kareem Jackson pick. I feel like they can. I think when you're even though the Chiefs' offense is not as good as it was in the past, but you still was able to hold Patrick Mahomes and company to 19 points, despite Travis Kelsey just tearing them up all game.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I feel like that's great momentum to build off of. I think they can. I think I think they will against Green Bay. I think it's going to come down to the matter of the question that I've been wondering for the Broncos is, can they play a complete game on offense? And that's where I think this game is going to come down to. To me, they have not. Chiefs game, they were just bad all around. But over like for the most part, I think that's going to be the key is like, can they play 4 quarters of solid football on offense where they can get the run game going. Russell Wilson looks a lot, it's not throwing 2 picks and fighting for his life on the field because of pass protection. But going back to your question, I do think they can build off of their performance against the Chiefs just because like when you're able to do that against Kansas City, I feel like that should give a lot of confidence to those guys moving forward. That we like this is the best version. This is the version we want to see moving forward, not the 70 points
Right.
against Miami or allowing 28 through 3 quarters against the Chicago Bears.
Yeah.
And then just falling out to the Commanders. So I think the defense is gonna like take that as motivation, the way they play against Kansas City, and just I think they're gonna carry on Sunday.
I think I tend to agree with you. The only thing I would say is that, every season has like, stats look weird for a couple weeks here, and then they look weird in a different way for a couple weeks there. And against the Jets and the Chiefs, the Broncos defense, only allowed the 1 touchdown in 10 red zone trips. And so like that just not, you can be a good red zone defense and you are not going to allow 10%, over the long haul. So I feel like, if that run sort of continues, I think they're in really good shape against Green Bay. But obviously you're not typically going to see teams go 0 for 5. Red zone touchdown percentage actually, I think it's down league wide, but 0 for 5, 1 for 5, like those are really good numbers that won't last obviously over the course of the rest of the year. So it's going to be one of those games. It's going to be very interesting to see. Green Bay's fresh off a bye week. Denver's relatively fresh after playing Thursday night last week. So, we'll sort of see, what the Broncos look like energy wise coming out. I'll put you on the spot for your pick, Ryan. I'll make mine too. It's Tuesday. You never know what happens at this stage in the season over the course of the week. Right now, Green Bay's a 1-point favorite. I think Denver's going to win at home at some point this year. And I tend to think that this is the week. Like Jordan Love's really struggled the last 3 weeks. He'll bounce back at some point. And it could well be this week. But I just think like, it's a team that you probably should beat with a young quarterback, a defense that struggled against the run. Like it sets up to be a game where you can go into it and you can get the job done on your home field. And then it's sort of amusing too, because it's like, is that actually in the best long-term health of the franchise? I don't know. I mean, I guess you just play the season and see where you end up. But I think it'll be close, really close. I think it'll probably be pretty ugly. But for the moment, I'm saying 21-20 Broncos. What about you?
I'm kind of similar there. I'm going 24-21 Broncos. I just, like you said, they have to win at home at some point. And this to me is the perfect weekend to do it. Like the defense is riding some momentum off after a solid performance against the Chiefs. At some point, the Broncos are going to have to get that run game going. I think this could be an opportunity to do it. So I think the Broncos are going to come out there, and it's not going to be pretty. It's going to be closer than it should be. But it's 24-21. I got the Broncos winning it.
There you go, sunshine and rainbows over here at the Denver Post as it pertains to the 1-5 Broncos. It's an interesting week. It's obviously an important couple weeks coming up ahead of the trade deadline. We'll see how all that shakes out. If there's any sort of playing time adjustments or anything like that going forward, we'll be here to cover it all for you. You can find all of the Denver Post work at denverpost.com/Broncos. See there for all the latest coverage going into this weekend and beyond. That's Ryan McFadden. I'm Parker Gabriel. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching if you're watching on YouTube, and we will talk to you guys soon.